Hi, this is Sean from Audio Assemble. In this video, you're going to learn how to make a Travis Scott type beat. So the production style that I'm going to follow in this is going to be that of Cardo and CuBeatsz. Together, they produce Travis Scott's Goosebumps. Both of their production styles have somewhat of an eerie feel and sounds like something slightly off kilter, so that's what we're going for. Let's go to Travis's sweet spot of 134 BPM. Now go ahead and click Option. Under Option, press Project General Settings. Here, you're going to want to change to make sure you have 8 steps per beat. This might look weird, but it gives us more room to work within the step sequencer and make our roll patterns without having to go into the piano roll. One of the most important aspects of producing is making sure you have the right sound. To make this easier, I went ahead and picked out a few packs that I liked some sounds out of, and I'm going to go ahead and look at the Ghetto Trap pack from Sample Phonics. I'm going to go in order and just start auditioning some sounds and replacing things one by one. Generally, I never end with the first sounds I pick unless it's something that really speaks to me or to the beat itself. I'm looking for something that has a bit of a rumble, but something that's not going to clash too much with the 808. So this seems pretty good. For the sake of time, I went through Noiiz and curated some sounds I liked for this. And though you don't have to watch the entire process, I will explain why I chose the sounds that I chose. I'll go ahead and drop in the trap hat first. When it came to picking a snare for this beat, I really wanted something that was sort of current, but also not necessarily a snare. I didn't want to use a general 808 or 707 snare. I wanted something that was a little bit weirder. I wanted something that gave nods to future R&B and that new trap sound. So instead of using an actual snare, I found a loop that I really liked. And even though I don't use loops in my actual music, a lot of times you can find really cool things that cut out of it. So it sounds like this. So as you can see, it has a lot of artifacts at the end. So earlier I just went ahead and used Edison to cut this to make it shorter. If you right-click any sample, you can open Edison to edit any waveform. So this song has no claps, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So you can see more of my thought process behind picking sounds. Let's open the Ghetto Trap pack back up and pick out an 808. What we're looking for this type of 808 is something that has more of a constant. It needs to have a long tail so that we can stretch it out, and it can be playable. At the opening of a production, your sound choices don't have to be perfect. Don't get hung up here. Pick something that works for your main idea, and then you can always come back and change it later, because we're always going to be tweaking anyway. So let's put down a bass pattern. This is going to be what everything else is built off of. Just remember, because you have these extra steps within your sequencer, your pattern is going to be spaced out farther than it normally would be. So I'm going to go ahead and place my main hits on the downbeats. So now we've got a really straightforward beat. And something that'll happen the more and more you produce is you'll realize you really like a sound, but you need to change it. So let's use some reverb to kind of change the shape of the sound and how it reacts in the beat. So what you need to make sure first of is making sure that it's sent to a channel, and now open up the mixer. Now I'm going to click slot 1, and I'll use the Fruity Reverb 2 to do what I need. So let's listen to what this default sounds like. It might be enough, we might need to change it. All right, let's turn up the wet. That's going to be the affected sound. Now let's turn down the dry, and let's change some of the positioning. Let's add more of a high cut so it doesn't ring as much. Let's see if this actually sounds better with having a side reflection. Now, let's go back to early reflections and sort of see what that'll change in this. Let's make some more small tweaks, but first, let's change the input back. That's better. Bring down the early reflections. That might be fine. So now that we've gone through that process, we know there's way too much at the tail of that. So instead of recutting this, I'm going to use the out function. This will allow me to fade out the end, and then I can use the trim to make it even smaller. That's perfect. So now I'm going to make some other small tweaks to the actual reverb. Let's change the size. What I want out of this reverb is to sound as distant as possible. I want it to sound like it's in a very open space, and just that it goes on for a really long time. If we change the diffusion, we'll hear more of the sides that this reverb bounces off of. So now you can hear way too much. So it sounds a little more like it's bouncing in a square room. So the more diffusion you have, it's going to be round. For these purposes, I don't want it to have any more percussive elements than it already has, so I need a really round sound that's clean. Now let's play with the decay. This will make it sound really like it's stuck in space long. That's probably way too much. Yep, that's too much. But let's add some dampeners to make it have... Alright, that made it better, but it seems a little too bright. Now, let's go ahead and add some hi-hats. If you control click any track, you can autofill what you need. Simple enough. That seems a little bit harsh, so let's tune this a little bit and also bring the hi-hats back. Let's pull down the pitch so that's more in key with everything else. That's better. Let's move on to our 808. Let's switch to pattern mode so we can just listen to it on loop. So you can see we've got our 808, but right now it's just an 808. We need to now make it an 808 bass. So to do this, go to the crossfade, turn it up, and your goal for this is to make it as fluid as possible so that there are no transients in between, making it click. As you can hear, this is basically perfect. It's just sort of gonna wobble back and forward. There's no clicks. It seems seamless, and it'll just loop between that red region from here on out. So now I'm gonna make some adjustments to pitch, time, and other filters. So let's go ahead and give this a low pass filter. Mod X is cutoff and mod Y is resonance. So let's change mod X, the cutoff, to about 11 o'clock. And let's change mod Y, resonance, to about 7 o'clock. So let's just leave it as is. Now control click the key bed to make it a little bit higher and put it in the actual right key of what this should be. And now let's go to the wrench and turn on portamento so it slides between the notes. To make this works, we need to make sure the max polyphony is 1. Now let's lengthen how long the slide comes between notes, and let's make it to 112. And there we've got our sliding 808 bass. Now let's try to make an 808 bass pattern. This should be simple to not overpower the actual rapper, but it also needs to be catchy enough that people can hum along to it later in their head. The cool thing about portamento is when you have a bass line and you add one high note to add sort of pitch dynamics, it sounds like it snaps to it. So now I'm at a point where I should probably save this. So I'm just going to save this as Travis beat. Always remember to save. So now that I have a general idea for what I'm going to do, I'll go ahead and record the pattern. All you need to do is press the little dot next to your transport and select what you want to record. And now you can go ahead and record once you press the space bar. So let's go ahead and open the piano roll. And let's edit out that extra note. So there it is. But also on our way there, we saw that some of the things were definitely out of sync. So let's go ahead and make sure that I quick quantize this. So go to the little wrench at the top and go to quick quantize. This should move everything in line. You might have to recheck it later, but for now, this will be good for our purposes. So as you can probably notice, our 808 and kick drum are somewhat clashing with each other. So we can make some edits to either one of them, or we can go ahead and replace the entire kick. So let's try some pitch things first. Now that our kick and 808 are more in sync with each other, I think we need to make them stand out a little bit more. So let's go back to our pack and choose a different 808. This 808 has a long enough tail, so it should be fine. And I can just drag and drop and make some quick edits, and we should be fine. One of the other reasons I love this 808 is it has a more aggressive attack at the beginning. So now we need to retune things. Now that we've changed our 808, let's make sure that the crossfade is correct. That seems fine. Let's go ahead and save. Now, let's replace the kick. What we're looking for is something that has some air in it. Something that has a punch and it breathes. You don't want it to be too aggressive because when it coincides with the 808, they need to work together in harmony. So let's retune. Right, so I think this kick will work. Now let's start making alternative drum patterns. If you control-click or right-click your pattern name, you can clone it. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this. Now I'm going to delete all of the patterns on the 2, 4, 6, and 8. This way we'll start with our bass pattern and then move to the alternates. The patterning will be A, B, A, C, A, B, A, D. To keep this simple, I'm really only changing where the hi-hats land, and then also where my double kick lands. So now that we're hearing everything together, I'm going to start making some tweaks so that everything is more complementary and also more congruent. The first thing I'm going to do is change the envelope on this kick. I want to make it a little bit shorter for the attack, just so it has a little bit of an extra punch. Now I want to pull back some of these frequencies. By doing this, I'll give the 808 and the kick more room to breathe, respectively. Now let's look back at the pitch for this hat. I want to see if I can get a little bit better with my brand new kicks in 808. Rather than lowering the volume of the actual hi-hat, to make it sound less aggressive, I'm just going to cut out some of the frequencies with the filter cutoff. It makes it sound like it's lower, but actually it's really just other frequencies that we're now really expressing, and we're going to use resonance to kind of push some of the other tinge and aggressiveness back up, but not have as much of that high frequency there. Now the one thing that's still slightly out of place is our cut. So let's change some things in the actual reverb, see if that's the problem. I think that gives it way too much color. In trying to find our perfect snare replacement, we've done a lot to what this originally was, but now we just need to tweak it to make sure that it doesn't have too much that is distracting from everything else, because this needs to be buried in the mix enough so that it's still very noticeable, but it's not completely overpowering everything else. So let's go back to the step sequencer, and we'll look at the cut actual sampler track. And instead of pitching it down, let's actually transpose it down 2 whole semitones. And now we have our snare, and it far better fits the mood. So now, let's look at the cutoff and actually pull back a little bit more of those highs so that we lose some artifacts. So we've got a lot of variables in here thus far. We've got our 808, we've got our trap hats, we've got a good kick, we've got our drum beat. So now we actually need to make a melody. So I'm going to go back to my pre-selected folder of sounds, and I actually picked out a really sort of eerie sound that fits the mood of what I wanted to do for this beat. When I chose the sound, I wanted something that would be complementary to the snare. It's not a sound you would normally use, but it sounds like this. So as you hear, that has a lot of things happening at the tail end of it. It sort of moves up and undulates down, and that's going to be a bit of a problem if I was actually playing this, but let's go ahead and make this work. So I'm going to go ahead and set the mode to stretch so it's easily playable. And now I'm going to change the root note so that I can play it as it should be played. Because this undulates back and forward, I'm going to do a little trial and error here, and we'll see what works. So I'm actually going to stray from the root note that it suggests because it moves up. So I'm actually going to move it 1 semitone up from what it suggests. And now, when I play it, it should sound like this. So for this sound, I'm still going to put a filter on it, but it's going to be a bandpass. This way I have more control of the shape of the sound, and I can change its cutoff and resonance again, just to make it sound a little bit creepier, but also not as analog and messy. So that really has that sound of just being lost out in the sea, but also something really eerie and ghost-like. And let's turn up the resonance so that it's a little more aggressive. Sounds kind of like it's going through some sort of vinyl or foam. And now let's play around with the actual pitch and sense. This is really going to be all trial and error when you're using something that's this dissonant. All right, I think we found it. Now that it's actually in the tuning it should be, let's create a melody. So when thinking about a melody like this, a lot of times all you need to think of is the chord that you want to be the focal point of the sound, and then take it apart. So now that I know what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to a brand new pattern, hit the record button, select where I'm recording, press the space bar, and record it. And this is what we've got. Now that we've got the base of the idea, we need to clean things up. We need to make sure things are quantized with the correct start time, end time if you're using a looped bass instrument, and just making sure that there's no wrong notes, no extra notes, and things of that nature. Now that we've fixed our quantization issues, now let's make some real changes. In the playlist window, I basically set it to melody and then 808 and drums. Let's loop the first part so that we can listen to what changes that we make. After it's looped, open up the step sequencer, then open the channel, send it to a mixer track. Now we're going to go ahead and open up the mixer. From this point forward, the two things I want is I want this to be far more haunting, and I want it to be far less bright. I still want the dynamic aggressiveness, but not all of the high. My go-to to achieve this is to open up the effector. This is basically like a Korg chaos pad. When using effector, if you want the effect to stay on, you need to hit the bypass button. So I'm going to turn down the dry so that we can hear what it sounds like by itself to make sure that I'm not just having a placebo effect. But let's try out some other effects. All right. So as you can see, it really filters, but that's not quite what I want. I still need to be able to hear the sound, but it needs to be faint. So this is a great way to open up. Right about there seems perfect. To make this louder, I'm going to use the Fruity multiband compressor. This way I can pick up the little nuanced clicks. So now that I've got this, typically I would make sure it's automated and just have it switch between effects on effector, but I don't actually want to go through that entire process. So the quickest way for us to do this is to go back to the step sequencer. I'm going to click on the original sample. I'm going to control click to rename it. And I'll rename this one opening synth. Now, let's control click again and clone it. Now, I also need to rename this one. Let's call this main synth. Now click on the sampler instrument one more time. I'm going to send this one to a different track. Let's just move it one up. We're going to go back to the mixer. We're going to add effector again. And this time I want the reverb setting. And last time I liked what this sounded like right about here. Make sure you turn off bypass. Now there's a real differentiation between our opening synth and our main synth. We'll hear much more of that when we actually go through and make sure that we copy this to a new pattern so that we actually have our opening synth same melody copied to the main synth. I'm going to go ahead and clone this. I'm going to Control X or Command X and then paste. And now let's make a full arrangement. Let's paste our main synth melody. If you play this back and it's the same original one that you had the first time, make sure that you actually look to the left and you see a little red arrow pointing at the correct pattern. All right, so I'm going to loop the end of this, and then I'm going to move the play start to the beginning and play it. Now you've got a basis for that Travis Scott influenced creepy beat.